raise a family. They have some of the same opportunities that me and my wife.
You agreed that we need to see them as a terrorist organization.
On a private cloud server, yes or no?
To love country, to love God, and to try to do the right thing.
Worked for the nation and the interests of the people.
Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast. This is a podcast with freedom-loving freshman members of the House of Representatives, where we try to provide you a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on in Congress. I'm joined today by my fellow conservatives, Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma and Eli Crane from Arizona. And we also have with us a special guest, Dr. Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation. But before we get to Dr. Roberts, first I have to say to you guys, you know, we've been back home for the month of August. I did not miss Washington, D.C., but I did miss you guys. So how was your August?
Mine was good. My oldest daughter got her learner's permit right when I got back, so I started teaching her how to drive.
Enjoy.
We did a bunch of work around the district. We did an energy tour with Matt Rosendale up in Montana, where he blew up 40,000 pounds of explosives in a coal mine, which was pretty awesome. And then we had Matt Gaetz come out to the district last week, so we had a good break.
That's awesome. Busy. You worked a lot.
Yeah.
It was good. It was tough to leave my 2-year-old a few days ago and my wife and my kiddos. But that 2-year-old and that, as we all know, just being here consistently, you get with someone during the break, and it just made it tough to, a few days ago to leave. I did have an explosion in my household. My 12-year-old lost his front teeth. We took a little vacation. Didn't turn out to be such a vacation for the 4 or 5 days we were gone. He busted out his teeth.
Doing what?
He put a blister on his foot by putting on some cowboy boots the day before, and so he's running on a treadmill with Crocs, and Superman dies on this treadmill and blows both of his permanent front teeth out.
Oh.
Yeah, that was interesting, entertaining. So we had something that blew up. And then we did town halls. We got to our 60th town hall since the head of the year. So
you're crazy.
Spent
60 town halls.
Spent time listening. And we'll talk about some of the things I think all of us gleaned from back home, I guess, in this podcast.
Yeah. Well, and with that, we want to bring in I guess you have the highest degrees of I don't have a doctorate degree.
No.
Dr. Kevin Roberts.
But you just call me Kevin.
Okay.
It's really okay.
And we've known you for quite some time, actually before I ever got here.
Yep.
So...
That's a punt to me, right?
Yeah.
I was trying to remember if he was punting to me, but he was looking at you.
Kevin, you were in Texas minding your own business. Eric was in Missouri minding his own business, and I was in Oklahoma minding my own business. And we found ourselves in the midst of what had been lockdown conditions, coming and all meeting each other. We were actually in the Trump Hotel for a number of days.
Well, for the
fiscal,
we were all fellow members
fellowship
of the Club for Growth Fellowship.
I had left politics. I was running a little small business, heavy equipment business. It was either sitting on a dozer, an excavator, and a semi truck, and was really not doing anything politically. And we spent that week, all of us, in D.C. Eric and I actually had a chance to minister to somebody in a group situation one night, and then we all kind of knew about each other. And so when we heard, still when I'm in political no man's land, I don't know what it was like for you. I'm like, Kevin Roberts just got picked for the head of Heritage, and that never happens. I mean, you followed the steps of Jim DeMint. When I worked for Tom Coburn, he was a huge deal. He and Coburn did a lot together, and that was a U.S. Senator who took over Heritage. And to see a guy from Texas to take on the helm of Heritage, I mean, it was astounding.
Yeah, I mean, that's your way of saying they hired a Texas Longhorn to lead the Heritage Foundation. That's your Oklahoma coming out, right? Yeah, I didn't expect that. I was leading the Texas Public Policy Foundation when we were in that fellowship together and truly minding my own business. My wife and I were raising our 4 kids in Texas. We had fought many years to get back there after a career in education, and we really thought that's where we were going to be. But the Holy Spirit had different plans. That's and good, so man. Heritage called and they said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Well, yes and no. Yes, because you're Heritage. I like any conservative. I'm grateful to you. But no, because we live in Texas, and we're all in kind of people. And so when the job came to fruition, we crossed the Rubicon. We sold our place in Texas and we moved to Northern Virginia, not in the swamp. We're as far away as we can be, but still close enough to commute in almost every day.
And what's it been like the first couple of years? So you started in 2021, is that right?
Late 21.
Okay, so the end of COVID, and then so you've been there, what, 2 years now?
Knocking on 2 years. The headline is it's been wonderful. Heritage, like you would say about your staff, about so many of your constituents, your family. The number one thing about Heritage is its people and colleagues who have been great patriots serving in the military like Eli did, men and women who have served the country in other capacities, and they all have this deep love for America. And so for me, coming in as an outsider, to your point, Josh, they really made me feel like I was at home. But I've been something of a disruptor in my career. I started a K through 12 school, which is now in its 17th year. I became president of a small college, and we told the Obama administration to pound sand on the Obamacare mandate. We didn't take federal student loans and grants at Texas Public Policy Foundation. I led that group from calling itself libertarian to recognizing it's really conservative. We're trying to conserve something. And at Heritage, when I was hired, they knew, look, I'm an outsider. I don't want to be part of the swamp. I try to spend as little time in this imperial city as I can. And figuratively, I want to blow it up. And so for Heritage, which is a venerable legacy institution, which is good for us as conservatives, that's been an adjustment, but it's been not just collegial, but really exciting, where people feel like, oh man, Kevin's taking the shackles off. We can really go lead this country at a time when, accounting for all of the optimism we have, we know we have a really finite amount of time to do it.
It's good. Define that. I mean, we can each of us define that, but talk about the finances. Talk about our financial picture as you see it.
Yeah, the financial picture for the country is bleak. It is, I'm just astounded by two things. Number one, just the sheer amount of money we're talking about, a $2 trillion annual deficit. You try doing that in your business. You try doing that in yours. You can't do this. But the second thing is, as I mentioned today,
it's bigger than the size of our gross national debt by 1985. 200 years of governance.
That's exactly
what
right.
we'll overspend in 1 year is greater than
just to put it in
200 years
perspective.
of debt accumulation.
But the second problem, which of course contributes to the first, is, as I said today at a press conference with some of your colleagues, it's political cowardice. It's political cowardice, not by you guys, not by the Freedom Caucus, not by a handful of other members of the House, unfortunately just a handful of members of the Senate, but that's what ordinary Americans feel. And to kind of come full circle in this thread, I think one of the reasons that the last couple of years, Heritage, I think, has been really dialed in. Hopefully, y'all see this as members, your staff do, being helpful, is we try to spend as little time in the city as possible. That when you can be with your constituents, when our policy leads can be out in your districts and others, and we're listening more than we're speaking, then we can take that back here to DC, and y'all are spending as little time as you have to here, I hope. I know that, knowing y'all. Then we're starting to tackle this problem because we're looking at it not from the standpoint of DC-based policymakers, but from the standpoint of real people. And for the real person, they can't even comprehend a $2 trillion annual deficit, not because they're dumb, but because it makes absolutely no sense.
Well, I mean, just because of your passion on spending, because of Jim DeMint's passion on spending, the reason why the three of us were asked to go by Club for Growth, that fellowship, is because we had developed a reputation, which Eli definitely has now also. They just didn't know about you probably at the time. It's a group that says we were looking for fiscal conservatives, people that we think, if they ever ran for Congress, could actually be passionate about what nobody's passionate about. The well-heeled money interest in Washington, D.C. rules the day, because everybody comes to D.C. to get something from their government. They don't have the JFK model of ask not what your country can do for you. And so this Club for Growth is a fiscal conservative group that was looking years ago and saying, who is in each state that could be a leader in their respective states just to hold the line to give our country a chance financially? It's the same thing that Heritage saw in you when they were interviewing you. They knew that about you.
Well,
so
apparently,
excited that you're there.
No, I love the job. Y'all know this from also as newcomers to DC. There are aspects of this town that are really rotten. In terms of a city, it's still a good city. The people in DC, like the men and women who grew up here, they're fine. But it's a comment about K Street lobbyists. It's a comment about people who want to come in and live at the trough. And our whole objective at Heritage is to cut that off. Full stop. And until that happens, we're not going to take this country back.
So talk about that a little bit more, because we're actually more freshmen here than you are, right? You've had one year extra.
You're thinking I'm an expert.
And so we're hoping that you're an expert. Tell us what is going on, because this is what's happening right now. So in some ways, it's a very simple situation that we've been confronted with, but in many ways, it's extremely complicated, right? I mean, it's like playing 3D chess here when it comes to what do we do with the appropriations bills? You've got the dynamic of what would the Senate do? How much can we negotiate? How much can we put the Senate behind the barrel in a negotiation? How do we strategically get to that point? Is it all a fool's errand, right? And so those are the kind of things that are going through my mind today. What advice do you have?
Well, I've got some advice, although, I mean, I'm still learning, right? And I learn things from y'all and from your staff, and that's part of the fraternity, right? Which of course is crucial. But what I know about the swamp is, because I know this a little bit from the Austin swamp, having done some work with the Texas legislature, smaller scale problems, but the same dynamic, which is this: that what the establishment wants to create for us is a false choice. And just like we're fond as conservatives in saying, stop accepting the narrative framing of the left, because that means we're dealing with their data, we're dealing with the choices that they're giving us, which are artificial. The right of center establishment is almost as bad.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do, this is the advice, is what we have to do, and I have to remind myself of this, my colleagues have to remind me not to fall into this trap. Stop playing that game. And it's sort of like Jesus upending the money changers table, right? That's the image. Upend that, I mean, even violently in a figurative sense, like in a rhetorical sense, and say, we're not even answering that question. We're not even playing that game. Here's your choice. And as it relates to the fight in D.C. now, which y'all and your group have been heroic about, it's a really simple choice. If you support the sweet-sounding thing called a continuing resolution, you support lawlessness at the border. You support our friend in Texas, Elisa Tambuga, who lost her mother and her 7-year-old daughter because a smuggler with 11 illegal aliens T-boned them in Central Texas. That's what a continuing resolution does. That's not being abusive. You want to support a continuing resolution, and of course that's just going to bring us to a ridiculous omnibus in December. Don't even go down that path. Reject it and say, this is the choice that you get to make. And we don't do that enough on our side.
And you think if we do that, then what will likely happen, you'll see the uniparty pass something that is the ultra moderate version, probably with nothing given for, and that's the choice that's the false choice.
That's right.
Is what you're saying.
So we want to impose a choice on them, and it's one or the other. You can go down the path that you're on, that the establishment, the leaders on right and left have put us on, which is spending money we don't have, right, and using language that makes it sound like if there is a shutdown, the country is going to come to an end. They closed down the country for 18 months. I mean, I think the Americans have sort of realized not half bad. But the point is that if you do that, then what you're doing is funding actively the way we've been doing things. And the way we've been doing things has created a $2 trillion deficit, and it's created a lawlessness on the southern border. 3.5 million illegal aliens have come to this country in Biden's administration. It has created, as y'all know well, I mean, and certainly your districts, you all know this, an impact on American society that is outrageous. That's what the leaders in D.C. want the conversation to avoid. We have to highlight that so that the American people who are with us, you know this from what you were hearing and your home visits during the recess, they want us to take a stand. Yeah. And what Heritage needs to do is to give you all the intellectual ammunition to fire those shots.
What's amazing is I was in New York City yesterday because of a Homeland Security Committee assignment and a subcommittee. Otherwise, Eli would have been there with me. I'm on a particular subcommittee. We were there for the celebration, or the commemoration, rather, of 22 years since 9/11 occurred. And what we saw the next day, today, we held a hearing, and I'm watching New Yorkers who are championing what their own mayor is now saying. He's saying they're coming from West Africa, and they're coming from all over the globe. And he's talking about the 100,000, what he estimates 100,000, has to be much more than that, that are now in New York City, and 10,000 a month. And he's saying that this administration is failing our country. And my question today at that hearing was all about what, I'd be derelict in my duty because, you got politics in that room that, far left, probably some of the most far left politics in the United States are in New York City. But I said this, I said, I'll be derelict in my duty if I don't say we're talking about the purpose of being here is the evolving threat of terrorism. You got 100 people per year that have come across that southern border. And that is an evolving threat. If we're going to talk about a real evolving threat, we've got to be able to speak truth to this. And somebody, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's our water infrastructure, and so what was astounding to me is even New York champions that type of commentary now.
Yeah,
it's in their backyard.
It's actually an example, if I can home in on that for just a
go for
minute, and pardon my passion. This is just something that drives me crazy about this town. And it drives me crazy about the political right, which is that we let them live rent-free in our heads. And until we just say, full stop, we're not playing that game rhetorically, mentally, intellectually, in terms of policy, we're going to keep getting our teeth kicked in. This example of why Mayor Eric Adams of New York is talking like us is because the governor of Texas,
Democrat mayor,
the governor of Texas, and the governor of Florida, and a few other governors said, we're going to start sending migrants to New York City, and you get to play the game that you impose on us.
Yep.
Those are excellent examples of how the political right needs to play.
So
You told me to speak the
Eli,
truth.
that's what we're hoping. Eli, you talked about earlier today about going back in district and kind of getting to hear from your constituents. And as you're approaching this subject, what are your thoughts based on what your constituents are telling you?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Kevin said. I mean, I asked my constituents what they thought about the continuing resolution or what they thought about this, possible government shutdown. And they not only yelled at me, shut down, but they're furious with this government. They don't think this government represents them at all. Matter of fact, they think often this government works against them constantly. So when I start talking to them and try and read where they're at and get a feel for where they are so I can come up here and represent them, it's pretty clear to me that, all the fear-mongering of what could be if there was a shutdown, many of my constituents actually want that, because they feel like the only way this town will change is if it's forced to change. And you see, some of the attempts, even since we've come back up here, now we're going to do the impeachment finally, that many of us have been calling for months, right? And it just seems like anytime you try and, make a change in this town, they break out the book and they start going through the fear-mongering lines that they're going to partner with their buddies in mainstream media to label you whatever it is. And I think Dr. Roberts here, pointed something out. He used the word political cowardice. And I think that's a real thing here. I've always believed, and it's one of the only reasons I ran, that the only way this town changes is if we get enough people up here who have the courage to just stand in the gap, take the slings and arrows, hold the line, and say, no, we're not doing it. And if that means you want to have all your friends and your commentators in the media and social media come after us and say we're this or we're that, that's okay. But we have to force change, and it's got to be forced, because that's the only language that this town understands. You're not going to come up here and make an argument that's going to get them to shift, their tactics or their agenda. It's going to have to be through force. And we do have an opportunity coming up here within the next week or so to attempt to use force again to make a change, and we'll see how that plays out.
So how, anybody can jump in here, how do you guys see that playing out? How do you actually compel or force a change to the system the way it is through this process? Because the way I see it happening is that if we're not voting for these bills, then the Senate will vote for some omnibus continuing resolution. Half the Republicans will join the Democrats, and then we all get rolled.
I say you let them take that. You let them make that vote. You control what you can control, and you let them make that vote. Just like we did in the debt ceiling fight. I go home and tell my constituents all the time there were 165 Democrats that voted for that, and 149 Republicans. I want them to know that Republicans are voting for this stuff. So
you want it ultimately to get out in the open.
Absolutely. We're supposed to be the ones stopping this stuff. But we don't, because there's this idea that we've got to all be on the same team. The bottom line is we're not all on the same team. You have a bunch of folks in the Republican Party straight up that are a part of the Uniparty. And all they represent is status quo. That's it. They will not change this country. They will not make sure that my daughters are able to afford a house, or anything like that. They will run us straight into the ground. Financially, and nobody knows better than Dr. Roberts over here, the trajectory of that. But we have to force it. We have to quit. Like, there were some arguments up there in the room that we just came from that our strategy needs to be such that we're set up for somebody who might be running for Senate or somebody who might be running for some other position, and we need to give them the ability to do that because we're winning the political games. Right, 2 years from now, that was one of the arguments, and I'm like, no, we can't do that. It's like we're losing the country. We are losing the country. We have to force change now. We're talking about the border. There's 100,000 Americans dying every year from fentanyl alone, right? That doesn't even count all the folks that are being sexually trafficked into this country. That doesn't count the 241 people that have come into the country that are on the terror watch list in the last 2 years. That doesn't count the 1.5 million gotaways. How many of those are on the terror watch list? And we just yesterday had the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, which changed my life forever. That only took 19 people to pull off. We're talking about numbers in the hundreds. And that's exactly where we're headed. We're headed towards another 9/11 or worse. And that's my point. It's like some of the things that we're fighting for, it's like they're not even I would say historic change. And even then, you have people that are constantly trying to weaken our position. And it's just going to take people that finally figure out that then you have to be willing to walk away. You have to be willing to say no. You have to be willing to stand in the gap and take the slings and arrows. And if we don't have enough of that, game over.
Yeah, either we'll change this country by choice, or we're going to be brought to our knees financially.
Yeah.
And so we have an opportunity to cheat history. Within 5 years, what we spend on just our interest payments, on our annual debt service payments, will match our defense spending. $1 trillion to each. It happens to us in 5 years. And we know half of our budget's almost just going to be interest on our debt by 2050. For those of us that have watched 25 years fly by like that, that's on us pretty quick. And so, it's not something we're fighting about, our grandkids. We're talking about something one generation away from us, that the America we know it is going to be radically transformed. Nobody knows what that's going to look like. What does it look like for hyperinflation or us to be financially brought to our knees? We don't know. But we know that either we're putting our own self-interest first or our country's self-interest. So I love, Eli, you're inspirational. When people talk about a government shutdown, as I'm doing these town halls, I ask people often, what's the longest government shutdown that you remember? I've not had a single town hall able to answer that question. Actually, I may have had one person in a town hall. What's the longest government shutdown? It was the winter of 2018 to 2019. It was 35 days. It was Trump saying, I need $5.7 billion to finish this wall. The sky didn't fall. And the reason why most people don't remember it is because life continued. Yep. The crickets were chirping. The birds were flying. And Reagan said, let government go away for a while and you won't even miss them. We've had eight different government shutdowns under Reagan. You had the 15 days almost under Barack Obama. You had 21 days when it was Clinton and Gingrich. And so you've got to be willing to apply the Billy Graham model that says when a bold man takes a stand, the spines of others are often stiffened. You got to be able to plant your sword, stand your ground, and say, "Thou shalt not pass."
In the words of Gandalf. Gandalf.
I'm glad that you've seen Fellowship of the Ring. Yeah, yeah.
All of that's true. What I would say is a shutdown isn't even necessary. So I agree 100% with what y'all said, because House leadership twice this year has mustered 218 votes on two really good bills. The Limit Save Grow Act,
Yes.
fiscal conservatism,
HR2.
and HR2,
Secure the
the
border.
border security. So put those in your continuing resolution.
Yes.
Get to early 2024.
So you're saying put it into a continuing resolution.
Absolutely.
You
and
would
get
be
it.
fine doing a continuing resolution as long as it had those provisions.
Absolutely, that's an answer to your question. You know, there is a financial reality here, and while I'm not going to lose a second to sleep if there's a government shutdown, and at Heritage we will not, we understand that the politics of that, going back to the framing question, are usually that our side's just not ready to play that game, and you know that there are going to be at least a few members of the Senate on quote unquote our side who are going to be undermining our messaging. Back, kind of come full circle. Put the onus on them. Have them argue against the Limit Save Grow Act. Have them argue against that wonderful border security legislation y'all passed. You did it once already. The House leadership did it once already. That should already be filed. That should be what we're talking about. But the reason we're not talking about it is because of how the swamp works. And there's been a deterioration in that commitment by House leadership. Maybe good men and women, it's not a personal comment. But for us at Heritage, if we had a magic wand, that's what we would say, go do. And you're not only going to win the messaging aspect of this, when we get into early 2024, you get to have a conversation, y'all get to have the conversation about what future fiscal discipline looks like.
It's good.
I work with smart people. I didn't come up with that on my own.
So this is this an official position of Heritage?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in your view is put together a continuing resolution that gets us into 2024. How
First
far?
quarter 24.
Okay.
Because we have to avoid what happened last December, which happens all the time. This is the script for people who've been.
The script is an omnibill. that-
Exactly. Members of your staff who are as conservative as the four of us, who are more experienced about this, they can write the script. What the swamp wants to happen is that there is a continuing resolution for a period of weeks that goes to November or December, and then you're squeezed because you're trying to get home and you're really behind the eight ball. And what Heritage wants all the time is for that kind of policy making never to happen, because the people's interests are never served by that nonsense. Don't play the game.
So you're saying if you're going to do a CR, don't do it until Christmas. Do it until
Early 24.
early 2024, because then you're all those pressures of that they traditionally put, and now you're into the election year and people are paying attention. It's an interesting strategy.
It's Sun Tzu, right? Fight the battle on ground of your choosing.
Right. I think there's something to be, in the discussion that we had earlier, there was something to be said about, I think one of the views is that if you get to the end of March, that according to the debt ceiling limit bill that was passed earlier this year that we voted against, but that there was a provision in there that said that there has to be a 1% reduction in total spending if we're under a continuing resolution. And so I'm not sure how that constitutionally you can force Congress to stick to that, but that's the argument, that if we push till the end of March, then suddenly there's a impetus to say, okay, we need to pass appropriations bills because now we have a different deadline.
I'd still much rather have the conversation then, even with that reality, than I would in late December, because we know there's a close to 100% chance that fiscal conservatives, common sense conservatives, your constituents, our members of Heritage, get rolled.
So Kevin, switching subjects a little bit, is that what I heard when I went back home that people are extremely concerned about is the weaponization of the federal government. When they're seeing another 1,000 people that are January 6th, like individuals that are being prosecuted for the incidents that happened on January 6th, and many of them were not even there, were not in the building did not go into the Capitol building, and yet they're being prosecuted. And then they see what's happening to Donald Trump. They're seeing what's happening to other conservatives. They're seeing that the FBI targeted Catholics. They're seeing that the FBI declared parents who stood up at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. And so there's this legitimate concern that we've got a messed up system within the Department of Justice. And so given that that exists, what kind of ideas or solutions have you guys crunched to help remedy that?
It definitely exists, and as I tell people, it doesn't matter what someone thinks about former President Trump. That is to say, there might be someone out there who says, I'm never voting for him again. We might have a different mindset about that. It's not just about him. So much of the media coverage is saying that conservatives have a problem with this DOJ because they're picking on Trump. Well, that would be reason enough to have a problem with the DOJ, right? But it's just emblematic of the larger problem. If you're Mark Houck, the pro-life activists in Pennsylvania who woke up with his 7 kids and FBI was ready with all of their weapons, or Scott Smith in nearby Loudoun County who was arrested and had to be pardoned by the governor of Virginia, you know that this is a systemic problem. And so what that has done, to the heart of your question, is give Heritage the impetus to say, we got to fix this. And we don't want to nibble on the edges. We don't want to play on the margins. We want to fix it. And so we're working on this project with a lot of our friends across the conservative movement called Project 2025, which is not just a presidential transition project for whomever our conservative standard bearer and president-elect is. Heritage can't have a dog in that fight, so we're friends with all of the contenders and brief all of the contenders. Whoever that man or woman is, we want them on minute 1 of day 1 to take power and to act like their hair is on fire.
And actually replace the swamp.
That is exactly right. And so to the specific example you mentioned, Eric, about the Department of Justice, I've said many times in the last few months, as it relates to the FBI, we need to start from scratch. Select all, delete. I mean this, the entire code, and y'all get to rebuild. There ought to be a Federal Bureau of Investigation, I think, but that merits a conversation. Their abuses of ordinary Americans' rights demands a conversation. Otherwise, we're going to lose the republic. And there has to be an overhaul of the Department of Justice for one main reason. Think about the commentary that exists across the center left. They talk about the Department of Justice being quasi-independent or independent of the executive. I'm an early American historian. I can tell you that's not what the founders imagined. The President of the United States enforces the executive branch, period. Y'all are the checks on that. And the judicial branch, too much of a check on the other 2 branches. We can talk about that maybe. But the point is, at Project 2025, we have those plans for the next president to implement. Obviously, some of that will require congressional action.
So it's a set of plans of things that need to be, actions that need to be taken by the president, people that need to be replaced.
A big part of it is personnel. And in 2016, the conservative movement was not ready to prepare this wonderful disruptor we had take office.
I think we were all surprised that Donald Trump won.
Even President Trump has said that, right? And so going back to your question about one of the things I've done at Heritage has done this kind of thing every 4 years. But being a Texan, I said, go big or go home. Yeah. So let's make it the biggest, most beautiful project we've ever done.
I just want you to know, Oklahoma is actually a state. We're not North Texas. I want to make sure that's often said.
You're still a territory.
I just want to make sure that you understand how important we are.
One thing I do know, after Saturday night, the Alabama Roll Tide, they're not as much as they used to be. Hook 'em horns.
Oh, man.
But back to your good question. What was I saying?
That you're going to do a wholesale replacement, a lot of staff.
Personnel have to come in. And so the most important part of this, thinking about Reagan's maxim, personnel's policy, is we're going to have 20,000 people who haven't just submitted their resume, but they've gone through 40 training modules for the precise job that we recommend they be appointed to. The president and his or her advisors will make those decisions, but we have to be prepared to govern as soon as the president takes the oath of office.
There was a news story that came out last week. I don't remember who it was that wrote it, but they actually broke down statistically the number of people that work for government, federal government specifically, and the number of conservatives that actually will spend their time working for government. It's antithetical to what a lot of us believe, and so a lot of conservatives don't get engaged in lifetime government bureaucracy. They'll exit. They're going back into the free market, but it's not just academia. we have a deep state of leftist ideology people who are planted there and who are the fourth leg of government. And so there's statistics that bear that out. And so, Tallahena in Oklahoma is out in the middle of nowhere. ATF comes in and takes away this guy's entire gun collection. We know that we know through rules process, this administration is trying to do a federal gun registry. And so what they can't do by law, they're trying to do by rules and regulations, and the executive is extremely powerful. Congress has allowed the executive to get far beyond what our founders intended. And it is time to have somebody who will go in and clean, not only clean house, but then reset, to have a president who would reset and say, Congress, you need to start doing your job, instead of letting all these decisions be let by the executive. And I would be excited about that message.
That's what success looks like, right?
Well, before we let you go, we like to kind of have a little bit of a lighthearted question. So,
Probably time for that.
My question for you is this: so, when your family is having game night, what's the family game?
The last few years, it's been Ticket to Ride.
Ticket to Ride,
Yeah,
the train.
the train game. And we have 4 kids. Our middle daughter is
played that?
Is like the CEO
Yeah,
of Ticket to Ride.
Never played it. Yeah.
You'd be good at it. Yeah. There's no doubt. Yeah, and now we have a couple of different versions. But we try to do game night several times a week. I can't always participate because of work, but there's usually a Scrabble game or a card game or something. But Ticket to Ride is especially on Sundays.
Settlers of Catan, have you played that?
Yeah, our girls have played that. I haven't played that yet.
Yeah, our family, it's both those games. We play those. So.
Are you any good?
No. Well, the one thing you learn is you let the Wookiee win, right? Sometimes, you know the expression, Josh, right?
Let the Wookiee win?
Come on, I saw that face.
Dude, I love Star Wars, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
When they're playing chess.
Let the Wookiee win.
Chewbacca, and Chewbacca goes to doing this howl. Okay, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So again, Dr. Roberts, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you in the new role. Thank you for advancing the conservative movement, and keep up the great work.
Well, thank you all truly for your service. We're really grateful for that at Heritage. Your staff are great, and y'all give us at Heritage hope. So keep fighting.
Well, I want to say this. Thank you for your leadership. It's the guy at the top that bends the curve, and so for your bold, courageous stand, even in this fight that we're about to go into, just from the things that you've expressed tonight, are very encouraging. Thank you to Heritage.
And how can people follow you and follow Heritage?
Follow Heritage at heritage.org. Against your better judgment, if you want to see what I write on Twitter, it's Kevin Roberts TX, and there's a little bit of Texas heat, some of that commentary.
That's awesome. A little bit of spice to it. And we want to say thank you for watching this podcast. And if you like this show and the conversation, be sure to like and subscribe and share it. The Fresh Freedom Podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Rumble. Make sure that you're subscribed. Until then, we'll see you the next time on the Fresh Freedom Podcast.